But yeah, welcome everyone. Welcome to Mapping Carbon Pollution with Machine Learning on Google Cloud. I'm Nikita. I'm a developer advocate. You already heard that, but my big focus is really helping machine learning engineers and data scientists think about how they can take experimental prototype machine learning code that they have somewhere in a notebook and figure out how to scale and deploy that code and build large scale models on Google Cloud. So today I'm really excited to share with you how to build a geospatial classification application on Google Cloud. The specific use case that we'll be working with is using images of coal plants and trying to detect whether or not they are turned on and producing carbon pollution. But the general framework I show you today, you could pretty much apply for just about any geospatial remote sensing use case that you can think of. So it's pretty versatile. So when we study data that's collected by satellites, we can often gain deep insights into the ways that our actions as human beings are affecting and changing the surface of the Earth. And when we bring machine learning into the fold, we are often able to get access to those insights in near real time, enabling us to be able to take action. So for example, there is a team at Google called Project Sunroof that is using satellite data and weather data to design personalized solar plans for people's rooftops. So you can actually go to this link up at the top here, sunroofwithgoogle.com. And if you are in Puerto Rico or the US, you can actually type in your address, which is pretty cool. And you'll be able to see your rooftop segmented and kind of trees nearby that are identified. And based on that, a calculation of what your solar saving potential is. Another example comes from the College del Rosario in Colombia, where a team of university researchers took satellite imagery and built a machine learning pipeline to detect illegal mines. They found that there were a lot of illegal mining operations happening in their national parks. And unfortunately, the way that we usually deal with this problem today is that human beings have to sit down and sift through all of these images, and it takes a very long time. And by the time someone identifies a mine in one of these satellite pictures, it's often too late to do anything about it. So they discovered that they could really automate that process and be able to detect these illegal mining operations before the miners had already left. And the last example comes from Google Research Ghana, where a team released the Open Buildings dataset. This is a dataset containing the location and footprint of millions of dwellings, both urban and rural, across the African continent that can be used. It's an open access dataset, and it can be used for numerous humanitarian and scientific purposes, everything from disaster response to population mapping to just basically trying to better understand how we are changing the surface of the Earth. So with that, we can move into talking a little bit more about the specific example today. So like I mentioned earlier, we'll be taking images of coal plants and trying to predict whether or not these coal plant towers are turned on and producing carbon emissions. And the kind of eventual goal is this idea of being able to build a map of the whole world where we can see where all of these coal plants are located and which ones are currently producing carbon emissions in a real, almost near time fashion. This work was very much inspired by Climate Trace, which is a collaborative data sharing effort across over 50 organizations. Their goal is to build a very comprehensive map of the world that is free and open access for anyone in the world to be able to go in and see how carbon pollution is being emitted at a country as well as an industry level. And they were kind enough to provide us with a small amount of labeled data for this use case so we could build this kind of like mini little scaled down version of their very ambitious project. So if you're interested, highly recommend you go and check out the Climate Trace website. You can actually already start to see their dashboard in there and do some research of your own. So the architecture for the solution today is that we are going to start with these labels that were provided by Climate Trace, and we're going to grab satellite data that is stored in Google Earth Engine. So Google Earth Engine, if you've never used it before, I'm not a developer advocate for Google Earth Engine. I'm not a geospatial expert, but I have to say, I think it's one of the coolest products that I've I've ever been able to use. And it's totally free. So highly recommend you check it out. But it's a multi-petabyte catalog of satellite imagery and geospatial data sets with planetary scale analysis capabilities. And you can use it to detect changes, map trends, quantify differences across the Earth's surface. And basically, it's got all this free satellite data that you can go in there, and it's constantly being updated. And it's really, really interesting to be able to use. So that's where we're going to pull satellite data for today. Once we have this data, we're going to go ahead and save out a training and evaluation data set, and we will save those data sets out to cloud storage. If you're totally new to Google Cloud, cloud storage is a pretty core component of basically any journey on Google Cloud. But it's just a service for storing objects. And an object can be pretty much anything, right? That's like a CSV file or a text file or an image or I don't know, any saved model artifacts, a pickle file. In this case, I save the data in the TF record format, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry about it. It's not super important. But once we've saved our data out to cloud storage, we can go ahead and train a model. So the model in this case was built with TensorFlow, with Keras, and I trained this model on Vertex AI. So Vertex AI is Google Cloud's managed machine learning platform. There are tons of products, as you can see here. They help you along basically every step of the machine learning workflow, from when you're doing experimentation and feature engineering and hyperparameter tuning, all the way to pipeline orchestration and model deployment. And just to narrow the scope, since there's a ton of stuff here, I chose to only use two of these products today. One of them is the training service, which is a managed platform to train machine learning models. And the other one is Workbench, which is a managed Jupyter Lab environment. So if you're familiar with using notebooks, if you like using Colab or Kaggle or Jupyter Lab in general, that environment should feel pretty familiar to you. And we'll go take a look at what that looks like at the very end as well. Okay, so after the model has been trained, I stored the saved model artifacts out to cloud storage. And then from there, our final step is to deploy a web service that uses Cloud Run so we can get predictions for new data. Because, of course, why go to all this effort if we can't actually use our model to do something? If you're unfamiliar with Cloud Run, it's a managed compute platform that lets you run containers on Google Cloud's infrastructure. You can run basically anything as long as you can build a container for it. And actually, in a lot of cases, you don't even need to build the container yourself. I was using Python in this example. So Cloud Run actually, you can build from source and they'll build the container image for you behind the scenes. So you don't even need to worry about that. It's super hassle-free. Don't need to worry about infrastructure, which is something personally I don't know a whole lot about, but you can just go ahead and deploy an app, which we will test out at the very end. Okay, so that covers like all of the tools, and I know talking about tools and products all day is no fun. So hopefully this will be a little bit more exciting. We can talk more about what the data actually looks like. So in this case, our inputs are images from a satellite called Sentinel-2. This is a wide swath, high resolution, multispectral imaging mission for land monitoring studies. So in this case, the Sentinel-2 satellite is ever traversing the world. It's taking photos around every 10 days of the same place. So as it travels and takes pictures of the surface of the Earth, we have basically a collection going all the way back to 2015, which is when this particular mission of Sentinel-2 was launched. We have images of every part of the world, every 10 days approximately, which kind of gives you this idea of how we can build these almost real-time visualizations and understandings of how the world's changing. If we have every 10 days going back to 2015, and some of these satellites have been running even longer, we can see how things are changing. So in this case, or basically for any satellite data that you work with, generally the way your data looks is it'll be of dimensions, width, height, and bands. So height and width, that's just the dimensions of your image. But then there's this third dimension called bands. And bands are essentially measurements from specific satellite instruments that pick up different ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum. So if you're familiar with doing image classification, You might know we usually have these 3 color channels, red, green, blue, when we do any image classification problems. In geospatial classification, it's very similar. We just have way more than 3 bands. And that's because satellites can pick up other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that we can't see with our eyes. So red, green, blue are included in these spectral bands, but we just have all of these other readings and measurements that we can take into account and can help us to make better predictions. So for a little more context, again, you can see here, like basically the Sentinel-2 satellite is just taking photos. Like I said, it's the same area every 10 days. And each picture that Sentinel-2 takes corresponds to approximately a 10-meter by 10-meter area on the surface of the Earth. So if we stitch together all those 10-meter by 10-meter area images, we would, be able to build out this nice map of the whole world. The outputs are much simpler. This is a binary classification problem, so our outputs are just numbers between 0 and 1, and we'll consider anything above 0.5 to be turned on and producing emissions. You can kind of see a nice visualization here. There are emissions coming out of these towers, and anything lower than 0.5 we will consider to be turned off. Okay, so let's dive a little deeper into how we actually build these data sets out. So I mentioned that Climate Trace, that organization, provided us with labels. The reason we needed these labels is because Google Earth Engine has been, it's ingesting all of the satellite data from Sentinel-2. But the satellite data, it's just images of, the surface of the Earth. And we don't know in all of these, tons and tons of images, where the coal plants are located. And even if we did know where they were located, we don't have any sense for whether or not they're turned on or turned off in any of those images. So that was the insight that was brought by the Climate Trace team. They supplied us with this CSV file, which every single row represents a coal power plant tower at a particular latitude, longitude, and timestamp. And then there is this nice column here that has a 0 or a 1 indicating if that power plant was turned on or off. So the first task was basically, as often the case with machine learning, we had to do a lot of pre-processing to get our data into a good format. And the first step is to basically go into Earth Engine and find the corresponding image for each of these coal power plant towers. So I did this in Workbench, which again is the Google Cloud place to go if you want to use a notebook. I'll show you what that environment looks like a little later, but it's basically a managed Jupyter environment. And I just wrote a Python function that maps over that CSV file, goes into Earth Engine, extracts the image from Sentinel-2 at that particular location and particular date time. And if none of that made sense, don't worry about it. The end result here is that we end up with these really nice 33 by 33 images. Really, realistically, it's 33 by 33 by 13 because there's one of these 33 by 33 images for each of the 13 spectral bands that we have. But what these basically look like, and here we're visualizing red, green, blue, just 3 of the channels. But what they look like is the coal power plant is at the center of the image. So the way this works is that each of those latitude longitudes corresponds to 1 pixel. And then I just padded that pixel with 16 on either side, which ends up with this nice 33 by 33 image. And your coal plant is right in the center of that image. So that's what we're going to feed to our model. And from that, hopefully be able to get predictions as to whether or not this is a coal plant that's turned on or off. A little bit more detail in case you're curious and you do want to go try out Google Earth Engine. I stored all of this information in something called a feature collection. Features in Earth Engine are geometries, so like a polygon or a point, like representing a lat long, and any kind of associated properties. And if you group a bunch of features together, you get this thing called a feature collection, which allows you to do super efficient maps, transformations, computations, rendering across that grouping of elements. So that's one of the really powerful things that Earth Engine provides with their APIs. It makes it very efficient to do these large scale calculations. So what the features look like is, in this case, you can see there's this is powered on property, which says, is this power plant powered on or off. That's our label in machine learning world. And then we've got properties for each of the 13 spectral bands. And each one of these is basically a 33 by 33 matrix. And we have 13 of them. But that's a whole lot of detail. So we'll step back and go next to how we create the model. So the model actually was not particularly complicated. I just normalized all of the data using the Keras normalization layer. If you're familiar with TensorFlow, this code might look pretty simple to you. If you're not, don't worry about it. Really, all we're doing here is normalizing the data using one convolution and then one dense layer with a single unit. And that's because this is a binary classification problem. We have a sigmoid activation, and then we compile and fit the model. If you're curious and you want to test this out yourself, I'm going to share 100% of the code at the very end, so you can go in and try all of this out for yourself. And if anyone is interested, I bet you could make a higher performing model than what I did just by making this model architecture a little bit more complicated. So if you're curious to do that, definitely encourage you to, and would love to see if anyone can outperform this model, because it was pretty simple. We just wanted to keep it simple for now. And instead of training the model directly in a notebook, which definitely was an option, I decided to train this model on Vertex AI's training platform. So I mentioned this earlier. And the reason for this is, when you're doing experimentation or you're trying out, how to solve a new machine learning problem, manually executing cells in a notebook might be the best option. But when you think about building large-scale machine learning applications, you don't usually end up training your model just one time. It's something you have to keep doing. And, if you want to do distributed training, or you have like a really long running training job, you might end up finding your notebook timing out. So there are a lot of reasons where when you start thinking about large scale applications, you don't want to be training models, directly in a notebook and sitting there executing the cells of your notebook step by step. So what I did instead is I used the managed training platform. You can see a little code snippet here. We're using the Vertex AI Python SDK. And all we're doing is we are, telling the Vertex AI platform to run this Python file that has my training code in it in this Docker image. It's going to run it on some VM somewhere, and then the outputted saved model will get stored in a cloud storage bucket. And you can track all of the progress of your training job in the Google Cloud Console. So the very last step was to use Cloud Run to deploy a web service that exposes a REST API so that we can get predictions from our trained model. That's what this command does here. Deploying straight from my source code, so I didn't need to build a container. In this case, Cloud Run built the container for me. And we can track the service here in the Cloud Console. So with that, I want to go ahead and test this out, and I will give you the classic disclaimer that this was working earlier today when I tested it. So hopefully it works right now when I show you this. So let's zoom in a little. So this is the Google Cloud Console if you're totally unfamiliar with Google Cloud. Let me just make this a little bigger for you. And basically, here's this geospatial service that I've launched under Cloud Run. We can go and check it out. And you can see I haven't used it currently. But yeah, there we go. Okay, so now that it's loaded, you can see that I've been kind of testing it out. And you can see the request counts and latencies, et cetera. So let's jump over here into Workbench, and let me zoom in one more time. Okay, so this is the environment where I did basically everything. I used this notebook to write all my code, and I wasn't running a bunch of stuff directly in this notebook. When I use the Earth Engine API to extract data or run computations, that gets run on the Earth Engine server. And when I train the model, that gets run on the Vertex AI training service. But I kind of use this notebook just as my central place to run all of my commands. And if you do want to take a look at all of the code at the end, you'll see that everything is laid out step by step in a notebook. So let's go ahead and try this out. So, okay, so the first thing we're doing here, I'm executing the cell, and whew, it worked. Okay, that means our service is running. So what I'm doing is in this Cloud Run service, I made this ping method, which is just like a test method, just to communicate with the service and make sure that it's up and running and that I've authenticated correctly before I start trying to throw a bunch of satellite data at it. So all it does is return this, your request was successful, with this happy little emoji. So that lets me know, okay, I actually was able to communicate with the service. So we can go ahead and execute some of these next cells. So this will take a little bit of time to run this last one, but let me show you what's going on here. So basically I wrote this function that is going to go into Earth Engine, and that's what this is right here. And it's going to extract a Sentinel-2 image at a particular latitude, longitude that I supply, and a particular start and end date. So what we're testing out here is I wanted to see the power plant that's located at this lat long right here. What did it look like in October 2021? So I just pulled the data for the whole month basically, and then extracted the most recent image from that month. And I want to see if it's turned on or off. I think we just got the prediction back, and you can see it returned a 1. So this power plant was in fact turned on. So to do that, I just extracted the data. I sent the data in the request message along with the bucket where my model is hosted, because this application, what the service is doing is it's just hosting my model so we can get predictions from it. And obviously we're getting predictions in a notebook here, but if you wanted to build like a large scale app, you could make these requests, anywhere else, because it's a REST API. So very last thing I'll show you, let's execute all of these cells. That should take a little bit of time to do, but to make things a little bit more complicated, I wanted to see what would happen if I put in the latitude and longitude for 4 different towers at a coal plant in Spain. So these were the coordinates, and basically extracted the images again. This is going to take a little bit of time. Let's see, to get these predictions, but then we'll be able to visualize them on a map. And again, this was for October 2021. Wanted to see if they were turned on or off. Hey, there we go. Okay, it loaded. Whew. All right, I was worried that wouldn't work. So here's the map, and again, we only got predictions for 4 coal power plants or coal power towers, but you can see I've used red to indicate that they're turned on, and if you had them turned off, it would be you'd get a blue circle right there. So we can see all 4 of the towers at this power plant. Generally, power plants have multiple towers. So we want to know, some of them can be turned on, some could be turned off. So if you wanted to test this out yourself, like I said, all the code is available. So you could even try different latitude longitude pairs for other coal power plants if you were curious. You just need to know where they're located, but we have the locations of a bunch of them in the GitHub. So just to finish off, I will show you the link to if you want to test any of this out yourself. It's all on GitHub. We have a blog post, we have a video, and then a notebook that's got everything in there. This is the link you can go to, or you can go to our GitHub, look at Python doc samples and the People Planet AI repo, which is a place where we're storing a bunch of interesting use cases that involve AI and sustainability. So definitely recommend you check it out. And if you build anything cool with geospatial data and machine learning, would love to hear about it. Always very excited to see how people are using any kind of satellite data, geospatial data, and building something with machine learning. So with that, that's all I got. I think it's Q&A time, maybe.
Thank you very much, Nikita, for your speech. It was very interesting to see how you could predict if the plant is turned on or not, and like do the full thing in such a short time. And well, very risky for you to do a live demo, but great, it worked. So we may have a small problem here. So basically, somehow we lost a little bit of the quality in the process. So not all code was readable. So
Oh no.
I think we will share the notebook for everyone in chat anyway. So you can go
Okay.
and like run it. Even I think like on our break, you can go check out the code and see what you can do, because there are a lot of amazing applications for satellite data, for example. And Nikita, what do you think? I don't think we have a lot of questions here, but what do you think is the like best scenario to use Vertex AI? When do I, as like a data scientist, when do I use it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So personally, like I came from a very like pure math kind of background. I didn't have a whole lot of experience when I started working in general in anything applied or in software or really even in coding, and that was something I kind of learned along the way. So I think my perspective was really about like the math and the data science, and that was what I was really focused on. But the more I learned, you start to realize that getting obviously the data science is really crucial, but you can be really short-sighted and not thinking about the larger kind of application that you're trying to build. And following a lot of like good software engineering practices along the way will really, really benefit you as a data scientist. And so that's something I'm super passionate about now. And I know like Vertex AI, it seems like this huge, large scale machine learning platform with all kinds of different products, and it's in the cloud and it's super complicated. Why do I need to use it? But there's lots of little products in there that can just really make your process a lot easier. And so one of the easiest, kind of the best places to start is with Workbench, which I showed a little bit of in the demo, but that's just a managed in Jupyter Lab environment essentially. So if you're already used to using a notebook, this is going to feel very similar. It runs in the cloud on Google Cloud. You can add GPUs if you want. You can scale the hardware up or down. You have access to places where you can store all of your data. You can run things on a managed training service. So if you want to run like a long running job, anything like that. So really, I think it's when you start to think about something more than just this is a little experiment. How do I maybe build something that we can use? Where do I host a model? Those questions are when it's really useful to start using a managed machine learning platform. And if you were to do this, by yourself without a machine learning platform to help you, you'd be worrying about infrastructure, and none of us want to do that, right? We want to build machine learning. So that's when I think it's really valuable to maybe use Vertex AI.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Honestly, from my experience, I've had so many projects that I just like did a demo. So I trained the model and then it never got deployed and I never went through like the whole process from start to end. And sometimes it can be very useful. Like even if you're doing something like for a hackathon, for example, for like we have a lot of students doing and you want to deploy your model immediately, or you're, I don't know, just working on some project and you want to share it, it's way more cool if you can do like the actual app and not spend so much time on it rather than just, training the model and sharing like notebooks with people. So that's a
Yeah,
very cool tool to use. Also,
definitely.
um, it was amazing to see you using satellite imaging, because I think like in the context right now in Ukraine, a lot of problems. We have a lot of data on satellite imaging, and a lot of problems actually do get solved. So, for example, there is this amazing project I want to share with everyone because we have. Um, um, Hold on one second. I'll send the link in chat. So the project is called UA Damage, and it's done by our friends. And the project is about uh, taking the satellite imaging and trying to understand how damaged is like each exact building, and they are trying to calculate like the overall damage done in different cities. So if you go check like this project out, that you can see, for example, they've taken Mariupol and you can see like they estimated different level of damages for different buildings, and they are trying to already think of how we will rebuild infrastructure, how we will move forward. And I think that's a great way of thinking. So I do think that even your demo can be very useful to like go ahead and try working with satellite data, for example. So it's not always so hard to make a difference. You have to like have some idea, some inspiration, and the good tools, which I think you are helping out with a lot. So let's see. Do we have any more questions? I think maybe we do not have too many questions because people didn't, I don't know, read the code or something. But we will share your notebook in the chat for sure. And maybe I think that's it. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being the speaker. And I hope we'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.